EW is not an add-on in conflict. It's not an optional extra. It's not a thing that's nice to have. It is as integral to the outcome of any military action, be that a small tactical action or be that a whole war, as force weight, as tactical acumen, as battle rhythm, as generalship, as leadership, as all of these other factors are. It is as important.
Okay, so earlier I did a video talking about the NATO summit, talking about them crying, oh, Russia, 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 Putin is such an evil guy. Spent a week crying about Putin. But now let's look at the actual battlefield. Let's look at some stuff going on, because we've heard all this noise talking about, oh, US can go solo against the whole world. Russia sucks, China sucks, their weapons are bad, United States is the best at absolutely everything. But now we're looking at the battlefield. It looks like these weapons, these vaunted, extremely expensive military industrial complex enriching weapons, are failing. Because these weapons, like I said in the last video, these weapons are not designed for a real war, a peer-to-peer war. These weapons are designed for war profiteering, like fighting in Afghanistan, Iraq, Eastern Africa, stuff like that, where you're fighting extremely weak third world countries where you can get away with not having top tier real weapons. But we're going to get into this article here where it's talking about Russia's new tactics paralyzing U.S. provided weapons midair, officials say. So we've seen the Abrams go over there, the Stingers, the HIMARS, all of these systems, these quote unquote magic bullet weapons that the United States has sent over there. Every time they sent the new system over there, there was all this hype and bravado going on. Media talking about this is a game changer. The Russians are going to be shitting in their pants, stuff like that. But the Russians have historically started slow in wars, and then they adapted to their enemy and wiped their enemy out. That's over the last couple of hundred years, generally speaking. Obviously not every time, not 100%, but generally speaking. And it looks like the Russians have been learning. United States uses a certain tactic, weapon against them. Oh, I mean Ukraine, because the United States says they have nothing to do with this. Ukraine uses a certain weapon or tactic against the Russians. The Russians, within a week, 2-3 weeks, depends on what it is, the Russians figure it out, quickly counter it. So they're talking about, oh, the Russians, they can't use helicopters because of the Stingers. When the last time you heard about the Stingers? Exactly. And a lot of this has to do with electronic warfare. The Russians are masters, probably the best in the world at electronic warfare. So I know a lot of people in the United States get emotional about this when you say the United States is not the best at something, and you can't even have a straightforward conversation with them because they get too emotional. America, America, rah, rah, how dare you say that? But the truth of the matter is, Russia has outclassed, a long time ago actually, Russia outclassed the United States in terms of electronic warfare. And the United States has actually gotten real soft because over the last 30 years, they've been fighting cavemen, third world countries, countries where you can shoot without having to worry about electronic warfare. There's no need to train and practice on it. And electronic warfare, basically in layman's terms, is using electronic disruption. So if a missile is precision guided, it's using some type of radar, some type of satellite connection to show it where to go. So if you can find a way to disrupt that signal, then the missile's not going to hit its target. Or if somebody's trying to communicate, radio or whatever, you can find some way to disrupt the signal to make their communication less effective. Russia's new war tactics are paralyzing U.S. provided weapons mid-flight, creating a frustrating challenge for Ukrainian forces, the Wall Street Journal reported Wednesday. Among the weapons the U.S. has provided to Ukraine in its ongoing war against Russia are precision-guided missiles and air weapons, which use an array of technologies to hone in on their targets. So I'm going to go back to that situation where they were talking about the Children's Cancer Hospital was decimated by a Russian missile, and the Russians provided some evidence to the UN to show actually it was a weapon from Norway created by the US and Norway in a joint partnership. It looks like because of the Russian electronic warfare tactics, the Ukrainians have to go through all these other tactics, very technical, but the outcome is the weapons go off target easily. And what may have happened is when the Ukrainians tried to shoot an air defense missile to stop the Russian incoming cruise missile, it probably got hit with electronic warfare. Something happened and sent it off course. But they're not going to admit that. What they're going to say, oh, Russia bad. They tried to kill children in the cancer hospital. Yeah, okay. Anyways. However, Russia has adapted its electronic warfare capabilities to scramble some of these weapon systems midair, rendering them useless or compromising their ability to hit targets with precision, Ukrainian commanders told the Wall Street Journal. So Ukrainian commanders, they're snitching. Because the U.S. will have its citizens believe, through its propaganda media, that it's completely unstoppable. All these weapons are perfect. The Russians could never, ever do anything like this. But Ukraine is saying, no, these weapons, these missiles that the United States is sending to us, they're being defeated by Russian electronic warfare. We're seeing it. We're on the battlefield. It's happening. But they don't want to admit it. The vaunted HIMARS, all these type of weapons. We should assume that adaptation will always occur, and the Russians have adapted to a variety of things. Rob Lee, a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, told Wall Street Journal, the capabilities will be most effective immediately after they introduce, and adversaries will develop countermeasures over time. So this statement here is a problem for the United States, because now you're admitting this guy here, he's not a general or anything like that, because they're not going to admit it until it's completely obvious to too many people. But he's saying, yeah, the Russians will adapt. This happens when you're in warfare using these type of weapons. A country like Russia, a pure power like Russia, they're going to learn your tactics. They're going to learn what you're using, and they're going to develop adequate countermeasures. But the United States, again, their military is designed for war profiteering, and these missiles are extremely expensive. The development program takes years. So it's not like the United States is built to say, okay, well, let's quickly develop a countermeasure, because unlike Russia, which owns and operates its military industrial complex, the U.S.'s military industrial complex is private and is not concerned about winning wars, is not concerned about effective battlefield tactics. It's concerned about profits. So if the U.S. says, well, we need to look into what the Russians are doing and how they did this and that, and we need to develop some type of countermeasure, the military industrial complex say, okay, I need an extra $100 billion in 10 to 15 years, and I'll get back to you. That's the problem. So if the Russians are going to counter you, you need to quickly find a way around it. But if you're caught up between war profiteering military industrial complex leadership and the politicians who they're in bed with, you're in trouble. For example, the Excalibur, one of these overrated miracle weapons. The Excalibur artillery round, a shell equipped with precision guidance provided by the U.S. in mid-2022, initially proved incredibly effective at striking Russian tanks and artillery with laser focus, according to the Wall Street Journal. However, Russian forces quickly adapted with electronic countermeasures within weeks and were able to confuse the shell's GPS tracking system, causing them to fly astray or fail to detonate on impact. And now this vaunted, extremely pricey weapon, useless. Yeah, you can go over there to Syria. You can go to Iraq. You can hit a third world country because, again, war profiteering, beating up on weak countries. You can go over there and use the Excalibur. You can't use it on Russia because it took them weeks to counter you, and you got nothing. You're like, well, let's see what else we got then. Let's see what other system we can send over there for the Russians to also learn about. Russian electronic interference is causing U.S.-provided missiles for the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS. We know about the HIMARS, so many videos, so many people talk so much crap talking about how the HIMARS is the greatest thing since sliced bread. The Russians developed countermeasures. They've been using electronic warfare to suffer a similar fate, despite the system being credited with turning the tide to Ukraine's favor during the summer of 2022, according to the Wall Street Journal. So this HIMARS, they said this is the game changer. We're going to push the Russians out of Kharkiv, out of eastern Ukraine. We're going to push them all the way back. They couldn't do anything with this HIMARS. It's basically useless. The Russians figured this thing out. So again, it will take the United States and their war profiteering as politicians and military industrial complex guys years to do something about this, because of the way that they've been operating in Washington for the last couple of decades. Ukrainian forces have sidelined U.S. provided and Boeing manufactured. That's one of the big time military industrial complex leaders right there. Boeing manufactured small diameter bombs after they began to fail entirely because of electronic disruption. So how much money did the United States taxpayers have to push over to Boeing? How much did Boeing get paid to develop this weapon? They're like, yeah, we use it over there in the Middle East. Let's use it against Russia. Oh, we can't. Russia countered it. It doesn't work. It's useless against Russia. Oh, too bad. We got paid. But nobody wants to admit this. And again, when articles like this come out, when people like me say stuff like this, it's hard to have a logical conversation about warfare in the United States because people get too emotional. If you don't say the United States is better than everybody, everything, and everybody else is trash, they're going to insult you. Oh, you're a Putin puppet. You're in bed with Russia. You hate the United States, stuff like that. They say, oh, why don't you go over there to Vladimir and fight for him, Conrad? Dumbasses, because they're too emotional. You can't just have a logical conversation. You can't say we have a problem here, and if you think the U.S. Army is going to go on the ground in Eastern Europe and just walk through Russia, you're seriously mistaken. You're going to cause thousands of U.S. soldiers to die because of your arrogance. You don't want to have conversations about this. You don't want to admit that there are problems, that the Russians are a real army and they have real countermeasures to all these overpriced ass weapons that the United States profiteers have created. Other Western weapons are still managing to evade Russia's cyber warfare capabilities and hit their targets with precision, including the U.S.-made surface-to-surface ballistic missiles and European Storm Shadow cruise missiles, according to the Wall Street Journal. So that Storm Shadow has been causing some problems and has killed some Russians. And that's another thing, because in war, people die, especially in a real war like this, not when you're ganging up on third world countries like Afghanistan, but wars like this, people die. So the HIMARS, the Stingers, yes, they're going to cause damage. They're going to kill some people. But overall, throughout the war, they're going to be rendered ineffective. But people are going to point to these instances and say, yeah, these weapons are perfect. So the Storm Shadow is doing some damage over there, but the Russians are figuring that out. They're figuring out the ATACMS. Apparently, they've already figured out the ATACMS, but we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, next month or so, how it plays out. But the US, the UK with their Storm Shadow, they're kind of showing their hand to Russia. They're sending some of their most vaunted, overrated equipment over there. And that's one of the reasons why the United States had to strip that Abrams down before they sent them over there, and why they were terrified of sending the F-16 over there, because two things: they didn't want to get embarrassed by seeing these things burning by showing the world that these things aren't invincible, they're not the best weapons in the world, and they also didn't want the Russians to get their hands on it, because once the Russian gets their hands on the F-16, the Iranians got it, the Chinese got it, and they figured you out completely, which they probably have already through spying. But Ukrainian officials warned that it may be only a matter of time until Russia learns how to counter these weapons. So these Ukrainians are fighting the Russians with these systems, so they know exactly what's happening, and they know that these weapons aren't all that they were cracked up to be. Some of the weapons the U.S. is delivering to Ukraine are also older and less frequently used by the U.S. military in favor of newer systems, according to the Wall Street Journal. So that's something right here. This statement is something you're going to hear a lot. U.S. is not sending Ukraine anything good, which they are. They're sending them some of the most sophisticated material. But some of the weapons are less frequently used because some of the newer stuff is still in development. The United States doesn't have large quantities of it. And this is what they have. A lot of the systems that the U.S. military has are decades old, like the Patriot, for example. That thing is old, man. Been around for a while. But people will use that as a cop-out to say, well, no, the Russians only counter it because it's our old stuff. We got top secret good stuff that nobody knows about, but a ton of top secret good stuff that nobody will ever see until World War III. And that's not true. The United States does have some top secret stuff and some stuff in development, but not to the extent that people are saying. Ukraine is not necessarily getting access to these newer systems, and weapons manufacturers are slower to provide software upgrades to the older systems Kyiv has been forced to rely on. But yeah, because either way it's going to be destroyed, and it's going to be a waste of money and a waste of time. Warfare is about the speed of adaptation. Retired Air Marshal Edwin Stinger, former head of operations at the British Military Defense, told the Wall Street Journal, if you drip feed an antibiotic weekly, you're actually training the pathogen, and we have trained the pathogen. We didn't need to give them that time, but we did. Yeah, so if you have something that's extremely effective against the Russians, you're supposed to go in and hit them hard, hit them fast. Don't just hit them a little bit at a time here and there, because it's going to give them a time to adapt. But what Marshall Stinger is failing to say is that the United States didn't have the capability of doing that through its proxy. It didn't have the capability of launching a large array of tanks and HIMARS and jets and all of that unless it sent its own forces over there. So it didn't really have a choice. And also, the political situation didn't allow them to just send mass quantities. But if they did, I don't know if they would have made a big difference anyways. Ukraine's domestic weapon production, while not as advanced as the U.S., has put a high priority on frequently equipping systems with software upgrades to improve their chances against Russian targets, according to the Wall Street Journal. A U.S. official told the Wall Street Journal, how many times we're going to mention, okay, we know who the article comes from, that the Pentagon is very aware of Russia's advancing electronic warfare and is working to ensure U.S. provided weapons keep the pace. So, like I said, after the Cold War ended, after the 80s, U.S. said, you know what, we need to retrain, we need to refocus. We don't need to spend all this money on extremely expensive training, have a very large standing army, because we're not about to fight Russia. We're not about to fight the Soviet Union like we thought we were. So let's shrink the army, which they did. Let's stop the electronic warfare training, which they did. Let's stop focusing on that. All the guys who trained on that was decades ago. They're all long gone, retired and everything. So when you go into Afghanistan for decades, go into Iraq, and when you go into Syria, when you go into Libya, when you're fighting in Western Africa, like Niger, against targets that can't fight back, when you're shooting cruise missiles at these type of targets, you lose the ability to fight someone who can actually punch back, because you're not used to that. You're not used to somebody having a counter to your cruise missiles. Anytime you launch, you know it's going to hit exactly where it says. You're not used to people being able to put you in shock positions, put you in high-level stress positions, like the Navy, for example. Let's look at this headline here. Carrier Strike Group commander who oversaw unprecedented Red Sea battle says the U.S. Navy needs to make sure it's ready for a drone fight. This is the guy. He was the commander of the Dwight D. Eisenhower, and they caught hell. They were over there in a full-blown war about to get knocked out, looks like, and word is they got hit twice by Yemen. They were having trouble. So the United States is not accustomed to fighting against enemies that can hit back. And even Yemen has developed a capability to hit back. So imagine what the Russians will actually do if the U.S. military went over there. It wouldn't be a walk like people think. It would be very nasty, very ugly. And I think the United States will be forced to go nuclear if they want to win that thing and save face. Unless they try to jump them. If all of NATO goes against Russia, then Russia might just launch a bunch of tactical nukes and destroy Europe. But that's a different conversation anyways. The U.S. alone has provided Ukraine with roughly $70 billion in military assistance since the country's war with Russia began in 2022. Western allies have similarly provided Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars in military aid. Despite the large amount of funding being given, American military assistance has done little to move the needle in the war in Kyiv's direction. Little, nothing actually, has done nothing. Ukrainian forces are struggling to maintain defensive positions along the eastern theater of the war as Russian forces with better manpower and weapons than Ukraine continue to slowly power forward and seize territory. So that's an admission right there. The Russian weapons in this warfare, the Russians' weapons are better. The Russians' tactics. The United States is training the Ukrainians, telling them what to do, where to go, how to do this, how to do that. At one point, the Ukrainian commanders actually said they need to stop listening to U.S. commanders because they don't know anything about this type of warfare and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're getting Ukrainian skill. But it's been proven that the Russians are beating the United States in tactics and they're beating them in weapons. All of these bunted, overpriced ass weapons, $800-900 billion, whatever that budget is. Nothing but war profiteering. Doing nothing but enriching politicians in the military industrial complex. But these weapons are not designed for peer-to-peer war. And when those F-16s do get over there, not going to do anything. Not going to move the needle. And we'll see a couple of them shot down. Or the United States is probably just going to tell Kyiv to make sure you keep them hidden over here. Hidden far west so they don't have the embarrassment of seeing them be shot down. But that's the story. The Russians are showing the United States a master class in land warfare, battle tactics in terms of drones. Russia outclasses them. Electronic warfare, Russia outclasses them. And in modern war, this is what you need. not a third world country, not fighting against a third world country. So the United States military overall, like the Navy Admiral said about the Navy need to learn how to fight against drones, and like I said, it was Yemen. The United States military overall needs training in a lot of areas if they want to fight somebody like Russia, like China, even Iran and North Korea. If they don't adapt to modern warfare, they'll be in a heap of trouble. Stop fighting up on these third world countries, because all you're doing is just killing a bunch of poor people and making your own military soft, because they're getting used to fighting against people who don't know how to fight back. But let me know what you think about this. Leave me your thoughts below. Share the video. Thanks for watching.